A lot of the tendency in ed tech is to program away a lot of the creativity so that everything is just being sort of adaptive, and adaptive learning is good. That's a good trend. But our approach is really more to equip educators with tools that can enhance what they're doing, that allows them to employ their existing knowledge and mindsets and skill sets to create these really dynamic learning experiences. Yeah, so Canopy Ed, the learning platform, makes it easy for educators to create effective learning experiences. Our own internal data is showing that with 2 months worth of tutoring, if students receive 16 to 18 sessions over 2 months, they're growing 5 to 6 months worth of growth, right? So we're seeing, close to a triple, acceleration of growth. And that's assuming they had been growing at a grade level benchmark previously, which if they're in the tutoring program, they were probably, getting less than 2 months of growth every 2 months. We have seen that tutoring is incredibly effective, and that's the most important thing. It's the most effective intervention that can be provided for students, especially those who are falling behind in some specific area. That is one data point that has informed a vision of one approach to education, a vision that is more compliance driven. That's here's what to do, here's how to do it, and now you execute within these very prescriptive lines. That has never been my approach. It's not what I wanted to do as a learner, as a student, and it's not been my approach as an educator either. My approach to education has always been around creating structures and frameworks that support a level of creativity and improvisation sometimes.
Hello and welcome to the Qualified Tutor Podcast, the podcast that brings you the latest in the world of tutoring, edtech and education, and hopefully inspires in you the big change that each and every one of us is capable of. Qualified Tutor is an industry-leading tutor training organisation and online tutoring community for thousands of tutors around the world. This podcast is the voice of this community, where we aim to hear from tutors, teachers, entrepreneurs, coaches, business experts, students, tutorpreneurs, and more from the world of tutoring about what inspires them every day, how they can help tutors like you, and what they've learnt about tutoring along the way. The question is, what will you learn today? Hello and welcome, dear listeners, to the 114th episode of the Qualified Tutor Podcast. My name is Ludo Millett, the host of this podcast. Welcome back to regular listeners. Welcome to any of you for whom this is your first time listening to the Qualified Tutor Podcast. And of course, a huge welcome to today's guest, William Minton. Welcome, William.
Hi, thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you on. Thank you for giving up a little bit of your time during this busy period for you. We will be finding out a little bit more about why this is a busy period for William and his business. But to give you an idea, listeners, of who William is and what that business is and why we've brought William on today, William is the founder and CEO of Canopy. Now, in addition to being an edtech company that serves as a high-quality learning management system and learning platform, Canopy also runs a statewide early literacy tutoring program that serves hundreds of children across the state of Louisiana in the US. In fact, William and his team have been helping to run the Louisiana statewide tutoring program ever since the lockdown first hit. And this has allowed them, as William mentioned to me when we first met, it's allowed them to participate in larger conversations around the country on the most effective models of tutoring and plans for tutoring-led learning. So all pretty exciting, really. Now, a former classroom teacher and Teach for America member in New York, William has a pretty profound understanding of how to fight the challenges that face our education systems today. Canopy is but one highly successful solution to that. I'm sure there are many more solutions for the issues in our system to come, William. Now, this isn't your first podcast, is it, William? In fact, it's not even your first podcast appearance this fortnight, is it?
No, I do these fairly often. I enjoy the conversations.
That's excellent. Now, one thing you may never have been asked to bring to a podcast, William, is a look back to your school, your childhood days. And I gathered that you have located, either physically or in your memory, some feedback that you received from a teacher many, many moons ago. Is that right?
Yeah, it's interesting. I really enjoyed this question, and it prompted me to reflect back on lots of various feedback that I received from my college career down through elementary school. And one particular piece of feedback really stood out to me as having created an impression. This was from my 7th grade English class. And the assignment was to add another stanza to a poem. So there was this poem that had 3 or 4 stanzas to it, and it was sort of a melancholy tone to the whole thing. And so there was the assignment to create a final stanza to the poem. And I had in my mind, and I remember this very, very clearly, I thought, I'm going to make a twist. I'm going to take this poem and I'm going to have the last stanza be positive, and it's going to kind of like turn the tables on the earlier tone of it. I'm in 7th grade. I think I'm like 13 years old or something. And I think this is really clever. And so I write something. I think it's interesting. And it was graded by a teaching assistant. This is somebody who was in the classroom under the normal lead teacher because she's training to become a teacher and she's in charge of this assignment. And she just wrote back, like, did not follow directions, and gave me, I don't know if it was a 0, but it was something close to a 0, because the assignment was about tone, and it was about like being able to match the tone from the earlier part. She's like, this doesn't match with the rest of the poem. And I went to her afterwards to like advocate for my grade. I was like, well, that's the point. Like, I know what you're saying. I was trying to do something more interesting with it. And she just wasn't buying it. And this was this like message to me that like my schoolwork needed to be like less interesting than it could be to like fit into this box. And it really aggravated me at the time. And I don't know how the lead teacher felt about it, but she kind of stayed back and let the assistant, have this experience. But that really did stick with me. And it was a sort of a message about what sort of formal education, what it tries to do to creativity, so for the sake of following directions. And that stood with me. I've gotten more positive feedback, as well, but that came to mind when you asked the question. So thank you for jogging that memory. I might do something else with that.
Well, no, thank you for bringing that to this conversation. I think that is, we can't place all the blame probably on that assistant teacher. She was probably following her own assignment. But I think, do you think then that experience has informed the way you've approached your workings on education?
Yeah, I think that it's one data point, right, that I use to juxtapose a lot of our approach to education, which, before being an ed tech company and running the tutoring operation, we did consulting, et cetera. And there's always an emphasis on participant agency, whether those participants are principals or teachers or students, whoever that is, sort of creating a framework that allows them to be creative and learn in interesting ways. That is one data point that has informed like a vision of one approach to education, a vision that is more compliance driven. That's here's what to do, here's how to do it, and now you execute within these very prescriptive lines. That has never been my approach. It's not what I wanted to do as a learner, as a student, and it's not been my approach as an educator either. My approach to education has always been around creating structures and frameworks that support a level of creativity and improvisation sometimes. Now, the structure part of that is really important. You need to provide good materials and good sequence and good structure and good questions, but you also need to allow room for authentic creativity and expression and student growth in a way that's more authentic and human, really, as opposed to just being sort of like prescribed step by step. And that might be one of my earlier memories of being forced into conforming when I knew that what I was doing is more interesting intellectually and was better for my growth as a writer and as a thinker. And I was being asked to roll that back. So that was interesting. And again, even as I'm explaining the story now, I'm thinking I might turn it into some content to make this larger point. So we'll see what I do with that later.
Yeah. So there's clearly a route here that's kind of developing. There's how you experienced education when you were younger, and that's tending to inform the way that you're approaching education as a professional. And those two are slightly contrasted to each other. How now is Canopy Ed then, your business, helping schools and educators see that approach that you have learned and that you have lived?
Yeah, so Canopy Ed, the learning platform, makes it easy for educators to create effective learning experiences. What I mean by that is it's easy to do activities that are high leverage for deep and durable understanding. So that might be the way that audio and video is incorporated, the way you can do PDF annotation directly with that, the way you can incorporate discussion threads, and you can do all of this in a really simple and seamless way. So that the learner going through is, watching a video, and then they are annotating a PDF with some key ideas, and then they engage in discussion with peers around ideas that stood out from that, and then they do an audio response question where they verbalize their key takeaways. And by engaging in these sort of multiple ways to engage with the content, as well as multiple ways to demonstrate their understanding, that's creating more deep and durable learning experiences for the learner. And then on the teacher side, having access to this sort of palette of different media types, it allows them to be creative in how they're developing those learning experiences, and to also see it as this back and forth between content and demonstration of learning and engagement, as opposed to just communicating content, which is what most learning platforms are built for. They're built to communicate from the teacher to the learner with less concern for how the learner is engaging and demonstrating understanding, right? That ends up getting limited to like a little quiz at the end. Then you call that engagement. And, that's good. You should be able to do that. But you should be able to do a lot of other stuff that's woven throughout the experience if you're actually really serious about deep and durable learning, as opposed to just wanting to check a box for compliance so you can pat yourself in the back and say, I communicated it, I did my job. But, talking isn't teaching. There's a difference there.
And that's what the rise in EdTech should allow us to do, isn't it? Is to build even more interactive, even more engaging systems. And I feel we cannot miss out on that point in this conversation, William, because we've got you here, lucky enough to have you in front of us. And this has been a burning question for me ever since I joined the tutoring industry and ever since the lockdown hit, really. You say that your vision is your philosophy is to build systems in education that allow creativity in learning. How then do creativity in learning and EdTech interact? How do we make those two things work together?
Yeah, so that's interesting, because a lot of the tendency in EdTech is to program away a lot of the creativity so that everything is just being sort of adaptive, and adaptive learning is good. That's a good trend. But our approach is really more to equip educators with tools that can enhance what they're doing, that allows them to employ their existing knowledge and mindsets and skill sets to create these really dynamic learning experiences. Or we provide sort of a framework skeleton of what that could look like, and then they're able to customize it, right? So we might have a course or a tutoring curriculum, for example, that is pretty solid, but we don't say that it's fully fleshed out and that this is the only way to do it, right? It's the framework, and then you can customize it for local context by adding in sort of other pieces, editing what we have there, and that ability to edit the pre-made materials is also somewhat unique to our learning platform. And this is mostly on the EdTech side of what we do, and then we use the EdTech to facilitate the tutoring program.
So just explain briefly to our listeners then, how do the two parts of the business work together then, the tutoring and the platform?
The platform can be used by any education organization to create any type of learning experience. And the applications are very broad, right? Some people use it for working with kindergartners, people use it for adult professional development, people use it for coaching, et cetera. Anywhere where there's teaching and learning, the platform is a good fit. We then have a separate contract with the Department of Education to provide tutoring services around the state. And so that's one application of the platform. And it's the largest application, the largest single application of the platform right now is to run this statewide tutoring program. And so we have this fully scripted phonics curriculum and placement screeners that place students into particular places. And then locally, they can customize it with like the audio response question so that students are able to do a read aloud and then play it back to themselves and submit that. And the tutor can listen to it before the session. So they're going in already with an idea of progress that the student has made. And the student can continue to engage with it between the sessions where they're practicing doing these audio read alouds. And so it's really effective for the tutoring specific case. And the use of the audio attachment and video features makes it so learners can go through it even if they can't read very well, which most of our learners can't because they're in an early literacy tutoring program. So they can get the audio and video and then practice their letter sounds or their read alouds.
Okay, let's go.
Welcome, everyone, to this, the 11 a.m. event on Monday, the 24th of January at the Love Tutoring Festival.
Okay, here we go. So, the first prize that we are going to give away today is number 9. Number 9 is, I need an extra monitor. That's what I need.
So, welcome to the 2 p.m. keynote at the Love Tutoring Festival, day 2, Tuesday the 25th of January. It's 2 p.m. UK time, where many of us here are based. Our speaker today is Michael Bungay-Stanier, who is as you can see here, Wall Street Journal best-selling author on coaching.
Maybe I hand it back to Ludo as a kind of what needs to be said to wrap us up here.
Well, Michael, you've made my job very simple. It doesn't really need to be much more said. That was world class. Yes, for those of you wondering, those were just a few highlights from the incredible Love Tutoring Festival 2 that took place at the end of January of this year, 2022. The big news from Qualified Tutor and the Love Tutoring Festival team is that we're back from Monday the 27th of June to Friday the 1st of July. The Love Tutoring Festival 3 will return. The focus of this festival is on alignment and new beginnings. The festival will have a slightly different feel to it, but all of the main tenets will still be there. A host of amazing speakers, including world-renowned leaders in education such as Craig Barton, will be joining us for a festival fanfare of training and of connection. Those are the values which hold the Love Tutoring Festival together, and those are the values that we want you to come and take part in over the week of the festival. Head to qualifiedtutor.org/love-tutoring-festival or simply head to our website qualifiedtutor.org to find out more and book your ticket today. Now, William, it's on that point, it's almost the summer 2022, 2 years on from our first kind of en masse venture into virtual learning, I guess. And you've talked a little bit there about how you've been helping in the state of Louisiana and running the tuition program there. Tutoring has had a massive couple of years. I think it's safe to say that. How do we make sure that this momentum is not lost then in tutoring? How does tutoring take the next step into its progress?
Well, that's a very important question, and it's a question that a lot of smart people are grappling with right now, and there are increasing resources flowing into coming up with answers to that question. So as you mentioned at the beginning, I've been able to participate in some of these, regional, national conversations about what works, what doesn't work, how can we do this at scale. We have seen that tutoring is incredibly effective. And that's the most important thing. It's the most effective intervention that can be provided for students, especially those who are falling behind in some specific area. Our own internal data is showing that with 2 months worth of tutoring, if students receive 16 to 18 sessions over 2 months, they're growing 5 to 6 months worth of growth, right? So we're seeing, close to a triple, acceleration of growth. And that's assuming they had been growing at a grade level benchmark previously, which if they're in the tutoring program, they were probably, getting less than 2 months of growth every 2 months. And we're getting that up to 6, because it turns out when you get students in small groups, and we go from 1-to-1 up to groups of 3, and you use a placement screener to figure out their instructional level as opposed to their grade level, so that you know the level of instruction that they're at, and then you work with them in a real methodical way. In a phonics-based model, it's really effective at closing gaps. Right? It's incredibly effective at closing gaps, because a second grader who's doing, kindergarten level work will learn it much more quickly than a kindergartner at that same level. So you can catch students up if you take the time to do it really deliberately. But a second grader that's just getting the second grade stuff and nobody's taking the time to step back and do phonics with them, then they'll have a lot more trouble ever filling those gaps. And so being able to intentionally figure out where they are and then methodically move them through, it is very effective. Our data shows it. It lines up with some of the new national data coming out around how powerful tutoring is. And now how powerful it is getting people's attention. And so there is this effort to figure out, how do we do this once our, COVID stimulus money runs out? Because the other shoe dropping here is the fact that it's expensive, right? So you're paying, adult professionals, a decent rate to work, for in these hour, 45-minute to 90-minute blocks. And it is very expensive for public systems to make this work. So how do we do that? How do we find efficiencies there while we can still make sure we're paying people a wage that will, attract qualified tutors that can do this effectively? Because not anyone can tutor, as I'm sure your audience knows, or at least not do it well. So how do we find efficiencies here? How can we use technology to find economies of scale here? How can we find new avenues of funding to make this sustainable? How do we, shift resources from other places? These are all questions that large school systems are having as they're trying to prioritize this. And it's not clear how it's going to pan out, right? So we'll come up with solutions. I think some places will probably find a way to make this sustainable, and other places will not be up to figuring out that challenge. But it's been really interesting to be in these high-level conversations where people are noting, okay, this works really well. It might be the best solution to these problems that existed long before the pandemic as well. We've had these funds to pilot a bunch of different things, and now let's figure out what's working and try and do more of that. And let's reorganize the rest of the system so that it can support these high impact interventions.
Absolutely. That's a pretty complete run through of the current state of play in tutoring. I think, William, it's clear that you're at the very forefront of that. And two particular points that are of note there is the cost and the economies of scale, is the scalability of it. Now, I want to ask you, William, how do we make online tutoring a scalable, affordable option?
Well, you need to make it easy for tutors. So that means providing, quality materials. And again, they should be able to customize, et cetera. But they should have a baseline so that they're not needing to create, extra materials beyond that. And then we need to make it easier for schools and families. And then as far as when and where the delivery is happening, this is a lesson that we've learned. So if you are talking about a more affluent population that has sort of more stability in like daily schedule, you might be able to be successful with after school, once a student's home, logging in from their home, their kitchen table, there's less noise, et cetera. You might be able to be successful with that type of a model. When we rolled our tutoring program out earlier in the pandemic, we were predominantly focused on lower income communities. Louisiana is one of the lower income states in the U.S., and the population we're working with is predominantly fits that profile more. And we learned that when you're working with families in these high stress communities, there's just a lot more turbulence in their daily schedules and their ability to get their kid on Zoom every Tuesday and Thursday at 5:30. And so we ran into a lot of rescheduling issues or no-show issues, and that becomes a morale issue for tutors as well. If the tutors are there and prepared and the families are texting 5 minutes before to say that they want to reschedule. And so I'm bringing that up to emphasize the fact that we need to be conscious of when and where the tutoring is happening. And so we found that we have a lot more success when we're able to work off the structure of the school day. And this means have tutoring happening sometimes before school. Sometimes you can have virtual tutoring happening during the school day, where if you're at a school that has one-to-one devices, which most schools do now that we're past the pandemic. So students are sitting at the computer and they're working with a tutor who's from another state or another country, but it's one-to-one virtual, right? So working in the structure of the school day or immediately after the school day. The school day finishes and the students are still at school, and then the family's picking them up afterward. And so to recap answer the question, what do we need to do to make it more sustainable? We need to make sure that it's easy for tutors. We need to make sure that it's building off of existing structures for students to be able to find the time. And we need to make sure that we are, measuring progress. We need to make sure that we are doing it at students' instructional level, meaning that it's being tailored to what the student actually needs. We're not just going through a generic, 7th grade math curriculum with them. We're finding you have issues with positive and negative integers and fractions are giving me problems. So we're going to work on specifically the things that you need help on. It's best when there's communication with teachers. It's best when it's aligned with the curriculum that the student is using in school as well.
And just quickly, how have you found that? Have you found that the schools in the state of Louisiana have been receptive to this?
Yes, and we're trying to be more so. And this is, and then beyond Louisiana too, I mean, we have in these conversations in other states like Texas and Maryland and elsewhere around the country, schools right now are adapting to this new priority being placed on tutoring. They like it, but it's still new, especially when you're talking about a large school system that has sort of a lot of bureaucratic inertia. So moving both to keep things still and to keep things moving the way that they're moving. It can be difficult to reorient. So we're still in kind of the growing pains of shifting these systems around. But it's been interesting. And there's been legislation as well passed recently in several states that require access to tutoring for families if their children are behind. So Texas passed this recently, where students are behind, their school systems are required to offer this type of tutoring. And so once the legislation's there, they need to find the money to fund it. And you're starting to see more and more of these types of programs being forced by legislators, and hopefully they will continue to provide the additional resources to support that as well.
Yeah. So, just kind of drawing to a bit of a close here, but I think this final question will help to contextualize that. Do you see then a future of mainstream tutoring without that government capital?
For affluent families, definitely, right? I think that existed before. It will continue to exist afterwards. I've taught at all types of schools. I've taught in some of the lowest income, lowest performing schools in the country, and I've taught at some schools where student body is very affluent. And in that more affluent school, I was surprised at how many of my students were getting tutoring like all the time. And that's great for them. And it works for them. I'm glad they had access to that opportunity. It was already very much a part of the student culture and the parent culture that you get tutors and you get individual coaches for sports and this type of thing. That was happening before. It will probably accelerate and be happening even more in the future. When we're talking about schools where the need for tutoring is greater, there it does cost money. So where will the money come from, right? So if families don't have the resources to fund it, then you're going to be looking at government in some shape or form, whether that's the local school systems prioritizing it and figuring out a way to fund it, or that money coming from the state or national level. But we will need the funding. Now, whether it has to be in addition to what's currently out there, or if there are ways that we can find efficiencies in existing budgets, which there usually are in public education in the US, that's another question. So I think there's the managerial will to dig into the budgets, and taking money away from somebody who's already getting it is always going to be politically tricky. But if there's a way to do it, and I'm hopeful, maybe even optimistic that we can make it work, but it's a question that hasn't been answered yet. So it'll be really important over the next couple of years here, as the stimulus money sort of gradually goes away, for the people that see the power of tutoring and the effectiveness to be very bold and very vocal about sharing their data and their family testimonials, and try to use that as a way to secure more sustainable funding for this. And again, that's developing those models is what a lot of groups are trying to do. And we've been able to be at the table for those conversations and share some of the lessons that I've mentioned here. So I'm hopeful we can make it work. Maybe I'll be optimistic once we start to see some more traction with it.
And now, a quick word from last week's guest, Tanya Kojeste.
Hello, this is Tanya Kojeste from Uber Tutors and Fearless Knowledge. Ludo, who is the host, is an incredibly humble, genuine, and like-minded person who I had a great time speaking to and having lots of laughs with. I also loved being asked amazing questions about my whys, why fearlessness, vulnerability, and emotional intelligence goes so deep into the fabric of everything that I do at my two companies, and why it matters so much.
I think you are allowed to be optimistic, William. I think that's a powerful message that you've just ended that with. And perhaps as well, you've actually answered my final question, which is, William, what's next for you? What's next for you on a personal or professional kind of level?
But grow everything that we've been talking about. Right? So we're growing our tutoring program. We're looking to try and secure funding to develop some artificial intelligence software that can assist with tutoring as well, which is part of that scalability part. And then also growing access to our EdTech platform and getting more institutional users using Canopy for teaching and learning in their organizations.
And if folks want to get in touch with either part of what your business does, William, where are the best places to go for that?
If folks are interested in the teaching and learning platform, can check us out at canopyeducation.com. And for information about the tutoring program and other consulting services that we continue to offer, you can check out canopyed.org.
Wonderful. Both of those links will be in the show notes below, as will the link to William's LinkedIn profile. I'm sure if you connect with William, he'd be very happy to chat with you and to take that conversation further. There's also, as we spoke about at the very start of this episode, William recently appeared on the Teacher Career Coach podcast with Daphne Gomez. So make sure you have listen to that before the next episode of the Qualified Tutor podcast comes out, which I know is already in your diary. So all of those links will be in the show notes below. But for one final time, for this episode number 114, a huge thank you to you, William, for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ludo. I've really enjoyed it.
And we will see you all next time. We'll be chatting to Sheena Aga about conversations around the curriculum and vocabulary and reading. So do join us for that as well. Thank you, William, and see you all next time. Cheerio. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Qualified Tutor podcast. Whether you're a regular listener of this podcast or you've just stumbled across it, join the Qualified Tutor podcast group within the Qualified Tutor community to stay up to date with our latest news, offers, workshops, and of course, simply to meet other tutors like you. Whatever your level as a tutor, our training courses will be the next step in your professional development. Visit qualifiedtutor.org/training to find out more about our CPD accredited and Ofqual recognised courses, the first of their kind in the tutoring industry. Your student deserves the best tutor possible. Make that happen today by joining Qualified Tutor